Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into a genuinely fascinating master plan that's unfolding right now in Delaware. We're going to explore how the lowest-lying state in the U.S. plans to take a compounding, truly existential crisis and literally engineer it into an investable, self-sustaining economic engine. It's this brilliant high-stakes mix of urban planning, environmental remediation, and next-level municipal finance. Okay, let's dive right into this. Today's agenda covers Delaware's ecological crisis, a stalling economic engine, the climate corridor solution, how three nodes make up one economy, and finally, financing the future. Section 1. Delaware's ecological crisis, a history of harm. This whole situation begs a rather provocative question, doesn't it? How exactly does the lowest-lying state survive the Anthropocene? See, Delaware is incredibly flat, mostly sitting on this highly permeable Atlantic coastal plain. And over the last century, tide gauges have recorded sea level increases of up to 15 inches on the Delaware coast. To put that into perspective, that is roughly twice the global average. So the state is facing an absolute existential threat. But you have to understand, it's a threat that has been compounding for hundreds and hundreds of years. When you trace the timeline of human intervention here, the sheer compounding weight of history is staggering. Between 1100 and 1600, indigenous Lenape agricultural burn clearing started disrupting soil stability along the riverbanks. Then, by the 1630s, European colonizers came in and introduced massive tobacco monocultures, which catastrophically exhausted the soil's biochemical integrity. Fast forward to the Industrial Revolution, and northern Delaware's rivers were absolutely devastated by unlined toxic lagoons and chromium waste from a booming leather tanning industry. And down south? Well, in 1923, a farmer named Cecile Steele ordered 50 chicks, mistakenly received 500, and decided to keep them warm in a piano box. No joke. That tiny, kind of hilarious logistical error birthed the modern multi-billion-pound broiler chicken industry, an industry whose nitrogen runoff is currently choking Delaware's inland bays with massive algal blooms today. Add modern military forever chemicals, PFAS, into the shallow groundwater, and you are left with a landscape deeply, deeply scarred by legacy pollutants. Section 2. A stalling economic engine, the ticking clock. Now, what's really interesting about the sheer scale of this fiscal liability is how it hits the state's bottom line. Historically, Delaware has relied really heavily on the corporate franchise tax as their cash cow, but that revenue stream is stalling out. The marginal revenue per corporate entity is actually shrinking. At the exact same time, by 2050, 24,000 coastal properties could literally go underwater. That threatens to completely annihilate the state's realty transfer tax base, which relies heavily on those high-value coastal homes. If those properties lose their value or, simply wash away, Delaware faces a massive structural deficit. So, to maintain their pristine AAA bond rating, they absolutely have to shift their taxable economic weight inland, far away from the coast. And this brings us to the political and legislative catalysts for making that shift happen. The 2025 Democratic Party platform explicitly mandated exploring innovative models like climate sanctuaries that integrate housing, community health, and environmental sustainability. But most importantly, it called to reimagine or even override outdated, highly restrictive zoning regulations. This platform essentially acts as the legislative green light required for the state to execute a radical change in land use, all to protect its tax base. Section 3. The Climate Corridor Solution, the Master Plan. Let's anchor ourselves with this definition. The Delaware Climate Corridor is this massive spatial and economic strategy. Instead of building more sprawling suburban development, the state plans to shift the economy inland, build vertically, and tightly pack it along the existing elevated Amtrak and SEPTA rail line. The plan utilizes climate-resilient modular vertical villages to physically and financially link three distinct populations: wealthy retirees, essential healthcare workers, and university students. It's a complete ecosystem. Section 4. 3 nodes, 1 economy. How the system works. Think of this whole thing as a massive spatial arbitrage strategy playing out across 3 geographic nodes on one single rail line. Step 1. You attract out-of-state capital via wealthy retirees to Node 1. Step 2, you seamlessly route their inevitable healthcare spending right down the rail line to Node 2 and use those tax surpluses to subsidize affordable housing for the nurses who care for them. And Step 3, you move university students into transit-linked towers at Node 3, which instantly frees up existing single-family homes for local families. Let's look a bit closer at Node 1, located in Claymont. We call this the revenue magnet. It's designed specifically to capture the silver economy. We're talking wealthy retirees fleeing high taxes and extreme weather in places like New York, New Jersey, and Boston. Delaware already offers massive tax incentives for retirees, right? So, by building high-end luxury vertical villages equipped with solar microgrids and closed-loop water systems right at the Claymont Transit Hub, the state captures this influx of capital. These affluent retirees become the foundational capital source for the entire corridor. They inject massive property and income tax revenues into the state, but crucially, and this is key, because they don't have young children, they don't place any proportional burden on the local public school system. So the crucial point is what happens next. Those wealthy retirees are going to demand world-class healthcare, which they can access via a super short train ride down to Node 2, the ChristianaCare health system. This hospital network is an absolute economic behemoth. But if a nurse or a technician cannot afford to live anywhere near the hospital, the whole engine basically stalls out. Delaware is facing a severe shortage of missing middle workforce housing right now. So the master plan takes the surplus tax revenue generated up in Node 1 to subsidize dense, transit-oriented workforce housing right here in Node 2. This affordable housing is the ultimate prerequisite for economic survival. It even supports the state's Delaware Earns retirement initiative because, if essential workers aren't crushed by exorbitant rent, they can actually afford to save for their own retirement. Finally, we reach Node 3 down in Newark, which is home to the University of Delaware. Right now, thousands of students live in single-family homes off campus, totally consuming the local housing stock. Because landlords can charge a premium per bedroom, local median-income families are systematically priced out of the market. The twist here is absolutely brilliant. Building highly dense, vertical student housing directly at the Newark Transit Hub isn't just about giving students a fancy place to live, it's a total zoning hack. By migrating the students into these transit towers, you instantly release hundreds of existing single-family homes back into the market for local working families. You're expanding the affordable housing supply without paving over a single acre of green space. When we zoom out and view this as a single macroeconomic ecosystem, we really see how it all builds together. Capital inflow at the top from retirees spurs development, which houses new residents, which permanently grows the tax base. That wealth funnels into healthcare revenue, which directly subsidizes workforce stability, which ultimately protects the entire state's fiscal future. It is a completely closed-loop economic ecosystem. Section 5. Financing the future, engineering the capital stack. Of course, a massive infrastructure play of this scale requires some truly visionary financing. You might be wondering, how do they pay for it? Well, the state will fund billions of dollars of these vertical villages by blending two highly specific municipal financial instruments. They're going to use green bonds to fund the physical hardware, the climate-resilient modular steel, the solar grids, the water recycling systems. Meanwhile, they'll use social impact bonds, or SIBs, to fund the social software, the actual subsidies required to make that workforce and student housing affordable. By packaging these two together, Delaware can bypass standard general obligation debt and instead tap directly into the multi-trillion-dollar institutional ESG, environmental, social, and governance, capital markets. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how a social impact bond protects the taxpayer. Private investors put up the money for the workforce housing upfront. The government only repays them if strict, verifiable metrics are met. Let's just look at the math for the hospital in Node 2. If replacing a burned-out travel nurse cost ChristianaCare $60,000 in turnover fees, and providing stable, affordable housing reduces staff turnover by just 20%, well, the hospital realizes $12 million in immediate cash savings every single year. A portion of that operational healthcare savings is what repays the bond investors. Taxpayer funds are completely shielded. When you actually model this out over a 10-year timeline, building 3,000 new transit-linked units, the result is profound. By year 10, the corridor is projected to generate over $21.3 million in net annual fiscal surplus for the government. It proves that properly engineered, climate-resilient infrastructure isn't just a subsidized expense to help weather the storm. It is a highly profitable, self-sustaining financial asset. Which leaves us with this final thought. Delaware is staring down rising oceans and stalling revenues, and they are literally engineering their way out by aligning human demographics with rail infrastructure and institutional capital. The blueprint is right here. So look around your own community. Is your city prepared to transition its climate liabilities into a self-sustaining economic engine? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I highly encourage you to dive deeper into how these innovative urban and financial models could fundamentally reshape where you live.